So I want to talk about the Packers defense because in early December, when things started going downhill with losses to the Giants, losses to the Buccaneers, and a near loss to the Carolina Panthers, I had decided that I was ready for the Packers to move on from Joe Barry, as many other Packers fans were. And now, after the past 3 weeks, and after a dominant performance against the best offense in the NFL in Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, I am contemplating changing my mind. And I think when you look at the Packers in a playoff game, the defense playing as well as they did, you do have to sort of scratch your head because the same defense that got run all over by DeVito, the same defense that gave up one of Baker Mayfield's best days of his career, and then the same defense that allowed Bryce Young to carve them up left, right, and center over 300 yards, 312 yards, that then comes in and dominates in the first half versus the Cowboys. It really is mind-boggling as to how this could be the same defense. And I think that there are a few different things that did lead to the Packers finding success that for a lot of the season they weren't able to find. I think early in the season, there were lots of games where the Packers defense kept the Packers in it the majority of the time. And earlier in the year, it was the offense that was, I think, holding this team back, especially in October. And if we remember those games against the Lions around Thanksgiving and then the Kansas City Chiefs, the defense was playing pretty good against the Lions, who have a pretty solid offense, and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. While not as good as maybe the seasons in the past, at least during the regular season, still they have Patrick Mahomes. And so when you see the defense play pretty good against those teams, and that allows the Packers to win those two games, after those games, you're sitting there thinking, wow, if the Packers can do that to the Chiefs, they can do this to any team in the NFL. And that's exactly what we saw against the Dallas Cowboys. And the part that is just confusing is you have that stretch of 3 games where it was like the lowest of lows. It wasn't just, mediocre performances. It was straight up bad performances, which it seems like, at least for right now, the Packers have left those, poor games behind them. There is a big game against the 49ers coming up Saturday, and that's going to be a big one for this defense. But I think when you look at Joe Barry, who's been here and he's now in his 3rd season for the Packers, after lots of years, after many games, most Packers fans have wanted the Packers to move on from Joe Barry. And I think that if we wouldn't have seen the performance against this Cowboys team this past week, the idea of moving on from Barry would sound more likely. But I want to read here what Matt LaFleur had to say after this game. He said this: "I couldn't be happier. I know what Joe Barry is all about in terms of resiliency. There's tough moments, and there's tough moments in every season. I felt like I know what we have in him and was confident that if anybody could right the ship, so to speak, it was him." And there are a few different things if you look at this Cowboys game that were, a little different than in times past. Jair, fully back, played really well, had an interception. Darnell Savage back after missing a ton of the season. And I think when you have 2 of your veteran players there, guys who've been here for multiple years, back in the lineup, there probably is a little bit more consistency in the communication and things like that. And when we look at the performance versus Dallas, I do think there was a different kind of energy and physicality this Packers defense was playing with that we didn't see back in early December. They were also tackling really well. The secondary was playing lights out. They were pretty much locked up on lots of receivers. And if you remember that game against both the Buccaneers and Carolina Panthers, there were guys wide open all day long in the middle of the field, on the boundary, just all over. There were communication breakdowns, and that was one thing Matt LaFleur said the defense needed to fix going forward. And if we look at that game against the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb only had 1 reception for 5 yards in the first half. And in that game versus the Cowboys, if you look at the total stats, it looks like a really bad day from the defense, but just looking at the first half, the Packers dominated. Second half, it was out of hand. It was, 48-16 with 10 minutes left. There was a ton of garbage yards, garbage time for Dak Prescott in the Dallas Cowboys. And I was reading an interesting article from Tom Silverstein of Packers News, and he had a few different quotes from Preston Smith and TJ Slayton, which may give us a little bit of an insight into a potential change the Packers have made on defense. So here's what Preston Smith said: "We're playing simple football, letting the guys play because we have playmakers. Obviously, we have young corners and young DBs that can play. We got guys up front, young guys and older guys, they can rush. When we're allowed to play free, a lot of big plays happen. A lot of success for this defense happened. I think it's been simplified lately for everybody so we can go out there and play at a high level, play fast, and do a lot of things." And Tom Silverstein mentioned how maybe that's one of the things that changed this game, is that maybe Joe Barry in the past few weeks has simplified this defense, because when you think of the fact that lots of the issues were communication issues in zone coverage, guys just not really passing guys off in the right way. They're just wide open holes against guys like Bryce Young, Baker Mayfield. It would make sense that if Joe Barry was able to simplify what was needed to be done from these players and they're able to play more free, maybe that was the problem. Maybe it was too complicated and guys were thinking way too much and weren't able to play loose and play free, which we saw them do against the Dallas Cowboys. And then here's another quote from the article from TJ Slayton, who said, "We're not doing anything extra. We're sticking to the basics. Be yourself. Let's just work together as a team. That's all we did tonight." And so it looks like Joe Barry, he has, at least for the time being, solved whatever issues were there for the defense in that really, really bad stretch of 3 games early in the season. And now if we look at Joe Barry in his 2 playoff games as a defensive coordinator here for the Packers, back in January 2022, the Packers lose to the 49ers at home in the divisional round 13-10. But it was a incredible game by the defense that game. The 49ers, 7 of those points were from that blocked punt, but outside of that, the defense played lights out. And then we have this game now against the Cowboys. And Joe Barry, his defense in 2 playoff games with the Packers has been very, very good. And so while there may be a ton of inconsistency in the regular season, maybe Joe Barry is able to get things going when he needs to. There's no doubt. I think that he at least was on the hot seat, at least among us Packers fans. And I think around the league, people were looking at that job and thinking that that could be an opening for the Packers at defensive coordinator. And so I think he's doing everything he can to fix things here. And I think that if we look at just what the Packers did against the Cowboys, it does make me wonder, can they do something similar versus a high-powered 49ers offense that, in my mind, scares me a little more than the Cowboys? Just because if you look at the Cowboys, their past, I think there's always so many expectations, and they always oftentimes fall short. The 49ers, on the other hand, don't seem to have as much pressure as the Cowboys because of the way things have happened the past few years. But I do think that this is going to be a big game for Joe Barry in his future. If the Packers defense plays well enough and plays a really solid game against the 49ers, I'll probably be on the Joe Barry train for 2024, because if you get to the playoffs and you play great football against some of the best offenses in the NFL, I think that's the kind of defensive coordinator you want. And it's crazy to say that when we look back at those 3 really, really bad games. But no matter who the defensive coordinator is in Green Bay, anywhere else, in the NFL, there are going to be bad stretches and bad games. And while I do think there's been a lot of those under Joe Barry, if somehow things start clicking in the playoffs and this unit plays really, really well, I do think it could be wise to stick with Joe Barry. So I'm not full on there yet, but we'll see against the 49ers. And I do think that just with this performance against the Cowboys, that there's a good chance Barry is back no matter what happens next week, because Matt LaFleur, he seems pretty happy and excited about what Joe Barry has been able to do. And so we'll see if LaFleur sort of sticks with that idea going forward. And another thing I found interesting that you guys brought up in my comment section was the idea that Matt LaFleur has maybe been more involved in the defense, which could be a possibility, because a few weeks back when things were going poorly, LaFleur said he needed to be more involved on the defense with the communication, things like that. But I do think it was another interesting note to bring up. But that is going to be it for this video. If you guys want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below. Turn on the post notifications so you never miss any Packers news. You can also follow me, Luke Beller3 on Instagram, Luke_Beller on Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time.